Welcome to another episode of Doubl3Tap. Today we welcome Justin Waldron, the co-founder of Zynga, now building GEMZ. Hello, Justin. How are you?
Doing great. How are you?
Yeah, excited for this one actually. Before we jump into the meat of the conversation, quick disclaimers out of the way. Um, this content is for educational and informational purposes only. Should not be used as investment advice. The opinions shared by Alex and I are our own, and we may have investments in some of the products or assets talked about in the show. With that out of the way, Justin, what games are you currently playing?
Uh, a lot, actually. To be honest, the games I play the most seriously are probably casual games, and that's a huge change from when I was younger. So I grew up playing StarCraft, Counter Strike, you name it, like hardcore sort of mobile PvP games were my favorite. And then I started getting into virtual worlds when I got a little bit older, and then just went extremely casual. And the lesson that I had, and the reason that I've been spending so much time on casual games, is that a lot of people like me, people who had the time to play games that require more time of you, don't have the time anymore to play those games. And so it's not just a sort of separate set of people like the sort of metaphorical 35-year-old woman stay-at-home mom or something. It's also just normal people who are busy, and who are wanting to spend a little bit of time playing games during their downtime. And so I play those games. I'm a user of those games. I'm a builder of those games. So, some of the ones I've spent the most time playing still to this day, I play Words with Friends. I played with my grandmother. I play with family members. It's just a good way to stay in touch. But I'm always, looking at the latest sort of casual games. So it's a list that's too long. I'm sure it's similar for you guys.
And are you playing these games predominantly for like research purposes to stay in touch with people like your grandma, or is it just kind of?
Uh, I don't play Words with Friends for research purposes. There's a deep insight in casual gaming that a lot of people don't quite understand. In particular, social games, which we were pioneers of back at Zynga. So that's that. Basically, people need something to do to keep in touch with other people, and it's for the same reason we go buy a pizza and we sit down with somebody. It's kind of awkward to just invite a bunch of your friends in the room with absolutely nothing to do and just find a way to have conversation. We say, let's play poker. We say, let's get a pizza. We say, let's go to dinner. Let's get a coffee. We need an activity. We need an excuse, right? And so what I've been building is digital excuses. It's like, what are the things that we can do that can keep us in a place where we're in contact with each other when the room is empty?
Why do you think they've become harder to find? Do you think they just went out of flavor? Do you think something happened with the market where the market just wanted a
Uh,
different type of game?
yeah, it's a great question. So like, it's actually they're the thing that most people want. So like, if you look back to the most successful games in the last 20 years, I mean, even before sort of internet gaming, social gaming, freemium gaming, couch sort of co-op or couch multiplayer with consoles is still the thing that sold consoles. If you look back at, why were people excited to buy an NES? There was two players and people were playing with their friends and family, and then they bought their own back at home. So this viral word of mouth. This is why Pokemon grew in the earliest days, which was trading took over elementary schools across the world. I mean, people had to plug their cable into the other Game Boy, and there was a social element to trading these Pokemon. So I think that this is the history of games, is that the number one thing, the number one reason we play is to test our relationship with other people. I feel like what actually happened was structural. So when it was possible to do, it was something that was extremely popular. So, at one point on Facebook, we had over 80% of all Facebook DAU were playing just one single game, which was Farmville. So pretty much everybody using Facebook was playing a game with friends. And this included every type of person, up from retirees to down to teenagers who were just getting access. There was really no difference in these people. So the great myth, and at Zynga, I think we were kind of like partially responsible for putting this myth out there, but we had to explain why what we were doing was so different than what came before. And so we started pushing out this marketing saying, hey, look, yes, teens, young boys that are teens are gamers. They play these hardcore games. Most people don't really understand them or want to play them. And so, we're making games for middle-aged women. And that wasn't really true. Like the average of all of the players was a middle-aged woman, because there were 52% of people on Facebook were women. And because if you average the ages from 13 to 70, you get about 35. So it was like, it was true. It's just, it's a statistical sort of like, it's a truth, but it's just not, it's basically everybody. Okay. And that's the average of everybody is a 35-year-old woman. And so the real story was we were making games that anyone can play. And I think that was extremely popular because we had the social channels to facilitate this type of play with friends and family. And what happened with the App Store was that they mostly went away, and most games are discovered through advertising now. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, except for the fact that as game developers and publishers, we need to figure out what the return on each dollar we spend is in the ad ecosystem. And if there's no way for us to easily get you together with your friends because the communication channels have been locked down by Apple, then really what you're left with is people going and targeting users that want to play a specific type of game and advertising to them and not advertising to their friends. And so what game developers realized over time, and we saw this transition from sort of the early mobile days through to today, was that it was more profitable to just focus on the people who wanted some very particular type of high lifetime value game than it was to go and try to figure out how to make a game that could be played with a lot of people. So it's not really a shifting of taste. It's more of a technical distribution story. And I think there's like, a lot of recent events that could turn it around again.
I think that dovetails amazingly into our first question, where one of the things that we love most is when you talk about distribution at Zynga, what you're working on now, et cetera. And one of the things that we think you do great is you kind of meet the player where they are, and you think about like the psychology clearly of gamers, and then kind of like building that up from first principles. So first off, previously at Zynga, previously with Facebook mobile, now you're doing things in crypto. Like, what's so exciting about the non-App Store opportunities? Is it just the distribution element? Is it the tech stack? Is it like the access to player data? What gets you excited about that?
Yeah, so the average Apple iPhone user downloads 0 apps per year. Most people don't know this stat. Like, isn't it kind of crazy that we have this whole industry of VC and sort of game developers around trying to make games when the average user downloads 0 apps per year? It's broken. It's completely busted. And then almost all the discovery happens outside of the actual App Store. Almost all of the discovery happens via Facebook. So you have this very strange setup where you look at the iPhone, almost all of the usage of the iPhone is on a Meta-owned property. You're in Instagram, you're in Facebook, you're in WhatsApp. You're spending all of your time on this piece of glass in something that Apple doesn't control. And this is the tension that we've seen playing out at the operating system level. Is you have, the reality is the user, the pixels they're looking at are probably 80 to 90% of time owned by other companies, but in particular TikTok and Meta, and that's covers about 90% of their usage. And then the other 10% of the time is like these other assortment of apps, the long tail and the OS. And so because of that, all the discovery happens from Facebook because they're the ones that have the engagement to put the ad in front of you when it's time to play a game. And we, through various things I've been working on over the years, have been trying to find a way to help people connect to play these games together because it's what they want. It's not only a better business, it's actually just what people prefer. And the challenge has been to do that in a way where Apple will allow it. So they've very famously have been blocking this for 13 years since since Facebook tried to release a way to do this way back in 2009. It was called Project Spartan. And the idea was to go build a mobile game platform that would sit on top of the App Store. And Apple said, you're not allowed to do that. They've had many reasons for this over the years, but it's security and privacy and all these things that don't quite make sense. But the real reason is like they don't actually want to have a competitor to the App Store. And they realize that because Facebook controls most of the time that you're on your phone, and because they already drive most of the app install distribution on the App Store as it is, that if they had their own App Store, all that distribution would be going to their own apps, not to the App Store. And that would make the iPhone less differentiated. So forget about the 30% fee. If you're going to use Facebook and Instagram as your main usage on your phone, and all of your apps that you use are in there, and you can just switch to any phone and they load up with the same apps. Well, then that's a pretty big problem for Apple, right? So they've been pushing back against this for a very long time, and there's finally been momentum on the regulatory side to do something about it. And so recently we've seen the government pressured Apple to make a change to allow for mini apps. And that went through just a couple of months ago. So now mini apps are allowed to facilitate payments. A lot of you probably heard about super apps in China, like WeChat, where they have these huge ecosystems of mini apps. And the reason is because they've been allowed to do this for years. Apple has allowed it because they didn't have the leverage in China to do otherwise. And what you're seeing is now that's finally opening up to the rest of the world. And so, there's probably a lot of work to get to an ecosystem as vibrant as what's popped up on WeChat, but you can expect a bunch of messenger apps and social apps to start to do that over the next year.
What sort of similarities do you see with Telegram, given that you guys have put out some stuff with GEMZ on Telegram, like with respect to some of the other social networks or platforms that you've built on previously? And is it pretty similar? Like what do you think it's just, anyway, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah. So actually Telegram is quite similar. I think that it's really well done. A lot of people forget or just aren't aware. The Telegram team has a very long history in social. So this is not like a new sort of Web3 native team. This is the founder of VK. VK was the Russian version of Facebook almost 20 years ago. And the people backing this company and the sort of immediate group that's responsible for growing this company, many of them have been working together for 2 decades in building social networks. And when they built VK in Russia, they built an app platform that was competitive with Facebook's app platform way back in 2007. And I've been watching them and working with them on some small projects years ago for a long time. And there's not that many groups that have that experience of building their own ecosystem, even back in the sort of social game heyday where Eastern Europe and Russia were all using their platform. So this is not their first time doing this, I guess, is the first thing I would say. And institutionally, it might not be the first time for some other companies, but there's a lot of turnover of staff. Like this is literally the same people. So they have extremely strong execution. And I think that they've really earlier on, like even a few years ago, identified that crypto might be part of the solution here to this problem where Apple wasn't allowing payments. And so they worked on this and they took that risk, and it took a few years for them to really get to the point where now you're seeing the fruits of that work and the potential for these wallets that people have directly inside the app to become something they can use to facilitate these transactions is going to be huge over the next year or two. But what's the same is the ability to easily connect and play with friends or your community, and the liberty to not have to download an app for everything you want to experience and to just hop in and out of these experiences very easily is all the same. That's sort of just this proven thing that's been largely missing for a while for other reasons.
Yeah, I would like to get your perspective basically on how much rewarded play was leveraged back in like the early Zynga days, because it appears to me that like a large reason why we have this like perfect storm with Telegram gaming, like a lot of that is fueled by this like highly incentivized like core loops or rewarding people for their time.
Yeah, I mean, all play is rewarded play, right? So like we play because we get dopamine hit when we try something out and it works or it doesn't hit, and then the brain wants to get more, right? So all play is rewarded play. There is no retaining app. Doesn't matter how beautiful of a transcendent experience it is. It could be the most elite indie game of all time. It's not fun if there's not some reward happening in the brain at some level, right? So I just, that's how I view games. There's no like sort of pure, even arts, even music, even hearing a melody, that hits the right way. It's all coming back to the same sort of loops that in our brain that are satisfied from these things. So question is just kind of like what reward? I think in social games, a lot of it was about social proof. And the fact that you could be on a leaderboard in front of all these people who actually knew you made people care. And I think that the magic of social games is that there were many of these communities, and there were many places for people to be number one. You could be number one amongst your 3 college friends, right? It's achievable. And it's even more motivating, and everybody has a group of people they care about. So the magic is like, how do you figure out what that group is? And then how do they go up and down the leaderboard in this group and have fun with each other while doing it? So the coins in Farmville, there was no way to cash them out. So in that sense, not rewarded in the sense that, there may be some future payday. There was none of that. But there were a lot of mechanics around trading your way up that are very similar to what we've been seeing in crypto. It was just all for clout, right? And it was just, we created such a better context for clout that it worked very well. And now I think it's harder to create that context, right? Like when you don't have the social connections and you show up in a list of 1,000 random names and they're not names you recognize, that doesn't work as well as it did before, because the context isn't there. So the question around like, what you can do even with like rewarding people, we used to have offer walls. They were called CPA, was a type of advertising where people would pay for users to do registrations. And one of the biggest buyers of those was actually Netflix. So tons of the earliest streaming Netflix subscriptions came from Zynga, saying to people playing Farmville, we'll give you X thousand coins to go sign up for Netflix. And then people would sign up for Netflix and we would get paid dollars, and we would pay the user coins. Like, this is something that people, so what's old is new again, right? So in crypto, we like to talk about tokenomics. Such and such game company like gave somebody some coins for going and promoting a tweet or something. Like, this has been going on for 15 years. So yeah, there's a lot of overlap. I think the difference now is that we can take these tokens or these coins, and maybe perhaps at some point they turn into some other value where the user can get them out of the ecosystem and do other things with them. And that's just, to me, the reason I've been interested in this space from the beginning is like, that's just good for people, right? Like the hardest part about what I was working on before was when we had these games we built for 10 years that, hundreds of millions of people play. And then someday they get shut down, right? There's not enough people playing them and they're off. And the ability to like take your built up currency and take it out and do something with it is something that I think most people have now started to understand the importance of.
To keep going on this line, like, you've been building these social games for over 2 years now. And outside of the context of Zynga and Facebook, obviously. What have you learned about like user preferences now versus then? It sounds like there's a lot of like similarities, but I'm curious if there's any net new habits or preferences that you've noticed. And also, how does that then apply to like monetization and then also scaling?
Yeah. Depends on how hot of a take you want, but in crypto, like every space, everybody tends to think as the space grows that like everybody is like them, right? But you can see there's these factions that have really started to become more noticeable over the last year or two. And the reality is, like, most people in crypto made their money in DeFi, and they made their money trading. There's like a very certain type of person who's done a certain type of thing to become established in this industry. And then they see everything through that lens, right? Like when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so everything that's been created in entertainment has been so focused on replicating what made DeFi work and what made these other protocols work. And in some ways, like, that's probably been helpful. In other ways, it's been extremely unhelpful. One of the challenges I see in this space is that it's hard to differentiate who's a customer sometimes and who's an investor. And when I look at the last couple of years of some very large success and failure stories, and sometimes both combined, we like to measure product market fit to try to go out and experiment and figure out and validate if what we're doing is working or not. And typically, if someone pays you for something, that's a really good indicator of product market fit, right? It's probably the best indicator. But in crypto, what we've seen is that there were a lot of people willing to, quote unquote, pay for things that they thought somebody else was going to buy from them later. And so they were buying for a different reason, right? And I think that that's led to a lot of confusion about what's working and what isn't. And then you have a feedback loop where those people, many of them, are putting very large amounts of money into projects that were confusing the teams and themselves about what was even working. And so I think the hardest part about the space has been to figure out how to find the signal through the noise. And then meanwhile, because all those projects are such difficult projects to understand, these DeFi protocols and L1s and L2s, like they're technical breakdowns. We need information distilled from other people. So we're looking on Twitter for people we can trust that do the research and explain to us what's going on. And with games, like that's not how people find games, so it is how people found games a while ago, where you basically go and like read magazines, and the magazines end up getting paid by the game developers to write good reviews, which is not dissimilar to the way that people on Twitter are getting paid to promote a game, right? And so now these people become extremely untrustworthy in many situations. And so it's been very hard to figure out like who can I trust and what matters. And my sense is that we put so much emphasis on tokenomics for the last few years that it was just impossible for anyone to play. Any normal people outside of the space could not play. I'm interested in growing the pie and getting like normal people to play. And when normal people want to play is the way that has to be delivered to them hasn't really changed at all, which is it just has to be extremely simple. And we've all known that the onboarding problem is the biggest thing here. I found that one thing that's really interesting is just to build the first 5 minutes of the game. So it's also a vertical slice, but it's very specific. Like don't build anything else, just build the first 5 minutes. And the reason for this is it's so hard to build something that is interesting and fun and compelling to a lot of people in the first 5 minutes. And that's where all the drop off happens in your funnel. Like when you release this product in the world, almost everyone is going to stop playing in the first 5 minutes. They will never see any of the other stuff that you planned, but we always make it an afterthought. So it is the highest leverage thing you can possibly do. But I think one of the key sort of understandings is that maybe we were jumping the gun and assuming that they needed to be onboarded at all. Maybe they can play some of these games and they can be introduced into crypto quite late into their experience with the game, right? Or maybe like never in a way that's even visible to them. Really, all they care about is, are they having fun? Is there some sort of future exciting thing about this game that they're working toward? And I actually think about that in the abstract. Like when we've seen some of these sort of airdrop related games, I think it's about more than the amount of money. It's about back to that dopamine hit. It's exciting for people to play a game together and to be part of this movement that becomes something bigger than them. This idea that they're part of a bigger movement than just the game itself is just more exciting, even if they only make a small amount of money. So I think a lot of people are underestimating that. Like it's actually something that's exciting to a lot of people.
You mentioned on-chain games. You mentioned the size of the target market for games that leverage aspects of crypto. Do you think there's a certain point in like the core loop of a game where the crypto reveals itself to the user?
It depends on the game and who you're looking to play, right? So I think for a lot of users, like crypto in and of itself is just a technology, right? So, and for most people, they don't care one way or the other. But we had trading in games well before crypto, right? So we were operating at Zynga. One of the teams I was running for a bit was a game called Yeovil. We are the largest virtual world in the world. People were trading in this game. There was something like 7 million DAU. Back when Second Life had something like 10,000 DAU, we're running a game with 7 million DAU. It's a virtual world you go around. It's live. You build your own spaces, but it was in 2D, not 3D. And there's a huge trading economy, absolutely huge. We're just making over $100 million a year back when that was a lot of money in 2009. So it was casual. It was a bunch of moms playing it, like it wasn't who you'd expect because we made it easy enough. So these ideas of like trading, they can appeal to anyone. You don't need to be in Web3 to have that idea appeal to you. But the way that it's going to look for someone who, trades technicals and charts all day versus a mom in Ohio, like it's probably not going to look the same. They might both be trading and they might both be exciting for different reasons. And the price still moves. But like the interface for doing that and is going to be different, right? And so the question is like, where does crypto add value? Especially if it ever makes things more difficult. And like, how do you balance the trade-off? And I feel like we've been so focused on geeking out about the sort of technical capabilities of crypto that we haven't been rigorous enough about about that. And I think that what we're seeing now is there's no simple answer to the question, because look, there's going to be games where, just like there are esoteric board games that are have very difficult rules that you can't play with most of your friends, but you could play with people who really love game design. There's going to be games that are just crypto games for crypto people, and I think that's great. But if you want to make a game for anyone, then it's probably going to have to be extremely hidden, right? And or integrated in a way where there's just no burden on the user. And if it is there, it's absolutely adding value. It's not just there for the sake of being crypto or Web3. So I don't think we've worked out a lot of these design problems yet. But I guess the point is, people are just people, and they don't want complexity. And so, insofar as like it adds any complexity, well then, it's hard to compete against the games that don't have it.
There's obviously a lot of attention on Telegram right now, and I think they've been able to kickstart that flywheel. There's also a lot of, it's attractive for a lot of people building in Web3 because of the sort of frictionless ramps that they've done and the introduction of stars, etc. But we've also seen people build out their on-chain identity and leverage apps like Discord for a while now. And I don't think it's difficult to see that happening with more, like, as Alex said, building where the users are and just bridging that on-chain identity over. Aside from Telegram, are there any apps or platforms that like really excite you over the next sort of, 2 to 5 years?
I'd love to see more on-chain social stuff happening and to grow bigger. I'd also love to see what Twitter does if they spend more time on their APIs. I think they spent some time kind of cleaning up their APIs because maybe they were open and directionless, and then they sort of started charging for a bunch of stuff, and they removed a bunch of APIs. So they've kind of done the thing where they cleaned house, but they haven't then gone back to it and say, how do we make this strategic? Like, what is the new thing that we can actually do? And there's a model now, right? So like if mini apps are allowed, then suddenly there's an incentive for Twitter to go back, dust it off, take a look at it with Elon and say, can we build if he wants to build the everything app, like he said, that includes an app ecosystem. You can't just do it with payments, right? You've got to also then have the services and apps on top of it. So I'd love to see Twitter give a real stab at this. I think that's the biggest opportunity. Now, I think one of the reasons it's interesting to focus on the website versus the App Store is, even though the regulatory progress has been huge, with Apple sort of relenting on some of these issues around crypto and mini apps, there are still a lot of open questions around how this plays out over the next couple of years. And being on the web, it gets you the flexibility of publishing in multiple places. Like maybe you could end up publishing the same game to Twitter's eventual platform if they have one, and Telegram and some of these other mini app platforms that already exist on other social platforms. And you also have the opportunity of letting your users go direct, right? They can go to your website. You can wrap it up in a PWA. You can wrap it up and put it in the App Store if it falls within the guidelines of Apple and Google. And so it gets you a lot of optionality. There's a trade-off, as everybody knows, which is Unreal Engine is very powerful, and so is Unity, and they're both really bad at publishing to web. So the big trade-off is like suddenly you have way fewer game engineers than the space where everybody's been focused on for the last 10 years. And you're not going to be able to build the same level of graphics, but for a huge amount of games, that's probably okay. If you go through the App Store, you look at the sort of top 100 games, there are fewer that are, these huge, like, extremely detailed 3D worlds than you'd expect. There is a space for that, but mobile games, like most of them, are actually quite simple. There probably are something that you could reliably render in the web if you really spend the time on figuring out how to do it properly. So from my perspective, it really is a story of where you're going to be allowed to take this where you want it to go. And I think that the web is probably the most important part of that. Like, we can't control where some of these other companies, how they decide to respond in this industry. So I'm always very worried about companies that are they have this 1 or 2 year timeline to build out on a game platform that they're not even sure they'll be allowed to build what they want to build at the time they aim to release it. I think that's extremely risky. And the web has its own challenges, but it also has increasingly more opportunities.
I think that just about wraps it up for this episode. Justin, man, this has been great. Actually, I think very insightful. And I think more people need to study the history of social games because, yeah, like you kind of alluded to, history tends to repeat itself. But yeah, man, really appreciate you coming on today.
Oh, this is great. Yeah, I was happy to do it.
The content of this video is intended for informational purposes only and should not be considered as investment advice. The views shared by Alex and I are our own, and we may hold investments in some of the companies or digital assets featured in the video.